Good afternoon, everyone. Hi, I'm McKenna Jordan. I'm the owner of Murder by the Book in Houston, Texas, and happy Independent Bookstore Day. It's been a hectic morning. I've been at the store. We've been busy, and we're so grateful for that. We really do appreciate the love and support, whether it's in person, on social media, or just good thoughts. We really do appreciate our loyal customers. I want to mention a few things before we get to the authors, the stars of the show today. This is such a cool event because, one of the things about the pandemic, right, has been no in-store events, and it's been horrible all the way around. But to be able to be joined by the 6 authors who are Best Novel nominees is a new thing and something we're just very, very excited about. I want to mention just a little shout out and add about the store. We actually have a subscription box plan now that people are loving, and we have lots and lots of subscribers, and we have 3 plans: Best of the Month, Crime Fiction Legends, and Cozy Corner, so a little bit of something for everyone. You can find out more about that at murderbythebox.com or on our website, murderbooks.com. We have a whole tab dedicated to our Murder by the Box picks, and like I said, it's pretty fun to have a surprise book or 2 books delivered to your door each month. For those of you who are watching, if you have questions, if you're on YouTube, put those in the live chat. If you have questions here on Facebook, you can put those in the comments. I've also dropped a link in the comments with all the Edgar nominated books, all the Best Novel Edgar nominated books by the authors joining us today. So if you're interested, we have them in stock, and we'll be happy to process orders. I also have been asked to remind the viewers that the Edgar Awards ceremony is April 29th at 1 p.m. Eastern, and you can register at Edgar Awards on Twitter, on the Twitter profile page. Again, that's at Edgar Awards. So make sure to check out that, because we all want to see who takes home the prizes. All right, in just fairness, I'm going to go in alphabetical order. So we're going to start with Deepa Anappara. Hi, Deepa.
Hi.
Good to see you.
You too.
So Deepa Anappara was born in Kerala, southern India, and worked as a journalist in India for 11 years. Her debut novel, Djinn Patrol on the Purple Line, was longlisted for the Women's Prize for Fiction 2020 and was named as one of the best books of the year by the New York Times, NPR, the Washington Post, and Time. And for all of these, I'm going to kind of give you an update on where the book is. So this book is available in hardcover, but the paperback edition is coming out in the US May 11th, and we have that available for pre-order at the link. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's lovely to be here, and happy Independence Bookstore Day.
Thank you. All right, next up alphabetically is Caroline B. Cooney. Hi, Caroline.
Hello, everybody.
Thank you so much for being here. As I was saying before we started, I was a fan of yours as a young reader, and I'm so excited that you're writing adult mysteries now. So this is a treat for me. And let me go ahead and get you introduced. Caroline B. Cooney is the author of nearly 90 YA novels, 2 picture books, and now Before She Was Helen, which is her second adult novel after a 40-year break. Her book, Before She Was Helen, is the one that's Edgar nominated, and it will be out in paperback May 4th. Thanks for being here.
Oh, it's my treat. Thank you.
Of course. All right, next up, Richard Osman. Hi, Richard.
Hey, Megan, how are you?
I'm good. So good to see you again after our chat when Thursday Murder Club came out a few months ago.
Now, doesn't it?
It feels forever ago, for sure. All right, Richard Osman is a British television producer and presenter. The Thursday Murder Club is his first and so far best novel. It is the one that is Edgar nominated, and it's currently in hardcover here in the US, and he has a second one coming this fall. I was telling the people ahead of time that I have shortened everyone's bios, otherwise we will be here for 10 minutes just to get through them. So thank you again for being here.
Absolute pleasure. Sorry, I haven't written 90 books. I'll get there eventually, Caroline, I promise.
Okay. I'm counting on it.
All right. Our fourth guest is Ivy Pochoda. Hi, Ivy.
Hey, McKenna.
Always a treat to see you. Ivy Ivy is the author of the critically acclaimed books Visitation Street and Wonder Valley, in addition to These Women. She lives in LA, where she teaches creative writing at Studio 526 in Skid Row. She's the co-author of the best-selling middle grade Epoca. I messed that up. What is it? Epoca? Epoca series with Kobe Bryant. And her Edgar-nominated book is These Women, which is out in paperback. It came out in paperback just a couple weeks ago, so we have that available currently. Thanks again for being here, Ivy.
My total pleasure.
Awesome. All right. Next up is Quay Cordy. Hi.
Hello. How are you?
I'm good. It's wonderful to see you.
Yeah. Likewise.
Thank you. Quay Cordy is a crime fiction writer and physician based in Pasadena, California. As a crime fiction writer, he made the Los Angeles Times bestseller list in 2009 with his debut Inspector Darko Dawson novel Wife of the Gods, set in Ghana. A new series with female PI Emma Jan, also set in Ghana, debuted to acclaim in January 2020 with the novel The Missing American. That is the book that's actually nominated for the Edgar. However, I know that you also have the second in the series out right now too, right?
Yeah.
All right, perfect. Well, I can't wait to hear about it in a little bit. All right, and last but not least, Heather Young. Hi, Heather.
Hi, McKenna.
I love your backdrop. You've got
Thank you.
books and bookcases, yeah. Heather Young is the author of 2 novels. Her debut, The Lost Girls, was nominated for an Edgar Award for Best First Novel and won the Strand Award for Best First Novel. A former litigator, Heather lives in Mill Valley, California, where she writes, bikes, hikes, and reads books by other people that she wishes she's written. She's here today for her Edgar-nominated second book, The Distant Dead. Okay, guys, we got through them. We got through all the intros. Yay. All right. First question, and here's my plan. Just so you know, I'm going to call on you for answers so we're not talking all over each other. And I'm going to consistently try to just go in alphabetical order, starting with a new person each time. So Deepa doesn't have to be the first answer every time. If you're just tuning in and you missed the beginning, you can put questions in the comments on Facebook or in the live chat, and we'll get to them in a little bit. Okay, so easy question to start with. Can you tell us where you're joining us from? And then also a little bit about your Edgar-nominated book in your own words. So Deepa, you are first up this time.
So I'm joining you from Essex in England, and my Edgar-nominated novel is Djinn Patrol on the Purple Line. This is the hardcover. I don't have a paperback copy as yet. So it's a novel which is a part coming-of-age story and part detective story about 3 children who are looking for their missing friends in an unnamed North Indian city. It's told mostly from the point of view of a 9-year-old boy named Jay. He watches a lot of detective shows on TV and fancies himself to be something of a detective himself. So when children start disappearing in his neighborhood, he decides to look for them with the help of his friends, Pari and Faiz. So they start out on what they think is an adventure, but then events take a sinister turn as the disappearances come closer to home. It's a story based on real-life disappearances of children in India, where I lived for most of my life. And it tells the story of these disappearances from the point of view of children who belong to a vulnerable and marginalized community. So it's a story of a tragedy. It's about how, as a society, we've been quite indifferent to people from certain communities and certain groups. And it talks about poverty and how that's affected the children. But because it's told from their perspective, it also has their humor and their belief in the supernatural as well.
Yeah. Excellent. Caroline, how about you? Where are you coming from? And tell us about your book.
I'm coming from South Carolina, and this is my book, Before She Was Helen. What if you decided to vanish from your real life and your real name and disappear and take on another identity and become a woman named Helen? Why would you do that? You'd be abandoning your entire family, your whole history, where you grew up, the schools you went to, and you'd be abandoning them forever. So either you did something terrible or something terrible was done to you, and it's so bad that you literally have to flee your own life. But what if you've managed to be Helen for 50 years and nobody has even noticed you, let alone caught you? And you move to a nice, bland retirement community. I set the book in the actual retirement community where I live, same streets, buildings, and so forth. I wasn't sure my neighbors would speak to me again, but it turns out they're kind of tickled. Anyway, you inadvertently leave your fingerprints in a house where a crime has been committed. If you are identified by those fingerprints, the police are going to find out who you were before you were Helen. So you're old and you're tired, but you have to save two people, yourself and the girl you were before you were Helen.
Well, I think you win the award for synopsis because I mean that was a great job. That was a great
job. I've been doing this for 70 years.
All right. Okay, Quay, you are up.
All right. Well, I'm coming to you from Pasadena, California. I can't say sunny Pasadena because it's kind of overcast. And my book is The Missing American. This came out in 2020, of course. And it's a story of where my new protagonist, Emma Jan, makes her first appearance. And she starts out as a police officer in a job that in a department that she hates, and then after a traumatic event, she gets fired, and she goes on to discover this detective agency. And her first job, she believes, is a simple matter of finding a missing person, and this missing person is an American who has fallen in love with somebody, a Ghanaian, online, and comes to Ghana to meet her. And well, then things go very, very wrong. And so Emma is plunged into this world that she doesn't know about. It has to do with Sakawa, which is the practice of online fraud combined with spiritualism and fetish priests and so on. So it's a story of a clash of a lot of different cultures from different countries, and even within Ghana itself, which is where it's set.
Excellent. Ivy, tell us about these women. Hi.
Hi, I'm Ivy Pochoda, and I am also in Southern California in Los Angeles, and it is totally not sunny out there. It's strange. My novel is These Women. I went and fetched it off the shelf. This is the brand new paperback. It came out last week. It is set in my neighborhood in West Adams, Los Angeles. It follows it's an unconventional serial killer story. I actually hate to use the word serial killer because then everyone's misdirected into thinking it's a serial killer story. It doesn't focus on the murderer himself, but it focuses on 5 women he's left in the wake of his violence. It puts the victims forward and lets sort of their lives supersede the investigation and the crime. It's a book about, they tell me it's a book about, social empowerment and change. I just think it's a book about listening to women whose voices are not traditionally heard in the real world or in crime fiction, giving voice to not just marginalized women, but women in general, and making us question why some stories are never going to be believed, no matter how truthful they are. I like to say it's a book that has a serial killer-sized hole in it, because that wasn't of the least interest to me until I had to figure out how to pull the trigger on the crime narrative. But so it's set in West Adams, and I think it's a kind of slice of life of a neighborhood you don't see too much, that also not well represented in the panorama of Los Angeles fiction and film.
Excellent. Richard, good to see you.
Well, I'm in London, England, just down the road from Deepa, and it is sunny here. So it's sunny in London and not in California. So there's a mystery to the right. Now I'm going to take you back to a retirement community. It's the retirement community where my mum lives, that I visited a few years ago. It's a beautiful place, green rolling hills, lakes, very silent as well. And like any good Englishman, if you find yourself in that sort of situation, you think, well, this would be a good place for a murder. That's exactly what I thought. And then I started talking to the people who live in this retirement community, all in their 70s, all with extraordinary stories. And I thought, well, if there was a murder here, then I bet you lot would solve it. And that's where the idea of the Thursday Murder Club came from. It's 4 people, all in their 70s, who meet up once a week to look over old unsolved cases. usually over a glass of wine. And then suddenly there's a real murder on their doorstep. And the question is, can they solve it? One of them used to be a spy, one was a nurse, one was a labor activist, and one was a psychiatrist. And it's essentially the story of these people who have, of course, a lifetime of experience, which is very, very useful, but also of a generation that has come to be overlooked and underestimated. And they use that to their advantage as well. A story of people in their 70s who are finding new friendships and new adventures and teaming up, and we find out if they can solve the crime. And I won't give away any spoilers. It would be a weird book if they didn't, would it not?
It would. Okay, Heather, last but not least.
When your name starts with Y, you get used to being last.
Yeah.
Anyway, this is my book, The Distant Dead, and kind of continuing the theme of shedding light on outsider communities. It's set in a very, very small, kind of forgotten town in the desert of Nevada. Its characters are people who have washed up there, because their life sort of didn't go the way they expected or wanted it to. The murder victim, the murder that drives the story, involves a math teacher who was a professor at the University of Nevada, and for reasons nobody's quite clear about, decided to move to this little town to teach middle school math. And as he was teaching middle school math, he formed a bond with a young 6th grade boy named Sal, who's an outcast, even in a town of outcasts. And after Sal, unfortunately, finds Mr. Merkel's dead body, he's been burned to death in the town in the desert outside the town. Another teacher comes to fore, Nora, who is stuck there. She wanted to leave, and she's stuck there taking care of her dad. And so together, these kind of lost souls need to figure out, what led Mr. Merkel to Nevada, and what it was about his life, past or present, that led to him being found dead in the desert.
Great job. It's amazing how, it's not amazing because it's the best novel category and things don't have to be thematic, but how different all these books are. It's pretty cool. All right. So Caroline, do you have a favorite motive to explore in your writing? And I'm sorry, you're first this time.
I don't get to think about it. Oh, gosh, I don't have a favorite motive, but I can tell you a favorite thing. I like action. I want a book where stuff happens. I think that's why I'm attracted to mysteries and suspense novels, because unlike so-called literature, where sometimes the book just sits around, in mysteries, stuff happens. So my main motive in doing the writing is to make sure that there is a ton of action, even though this particular book involves an elderly lady you might not think of as being an active person. Well, she's forced to be.
Great. Quay, you're up next.
I like things to be as twisted as possible. And with my novels, I would say there's a lot of family involved, and I think within families you can get all these heightened tensions that are sort of boiling under the surface, because you know these people who are your relatives and you're supposed to love them, but there's all this tension, and some of the reasons are, as I say, very twisted. So yeah, a lot of twisted family stuff. Jealousy is like way up there. Lust, yep. Greed, definitely. So yeah, those are some of the ones that really get me going.
Excellent. Ivy?
Man, I wish that would imply that there was some forethought to this. Oh, a motive. Yeah. Okay. Now I have no idea what I'm doing when I write. But in all seriousness, great. I'm sort of interested in crime doesn't happen in a vacuum and murder doesn't happen in a vacuum. And especially a heightened event or a violent action is the sum of all the incidences that have led up to that point. And so I'm sort of interested in when those moments started piling up and tracing it back to see where a path forked and someone made a series of decisions that kept compounding until they led to the crime that's in the book. which doesn't at all describe the book that I'm nominated for, because the motive isn't in it. I don't know what I'm talking about. So, I mean, but, you know, but I'm actually more interested in the women in this book and like what led them to be in the path of this murderer, or like what led them to like, you know, cohabitate with him, or, you know, exist in his presence in various different ways. And, you know, we are all, there's a deeper pull of blood that gets us to, you know, certain circumstances. So I'm sort of interested in like at the sort of, you know, snowball effect of events. And if we can find that one moment, like trace it back to the past to see where you might have gone off the rails a little bit. So yeah, cumulative.
Cumulative motive. Richard.
It's hard, isn't it? Because I've only had one novel published. So if I tell you what my favourite motive is, surely that would be I basically agree with what Ivy's just saying. I like a murder that is inevitable, and a series of events mean that it had to happen inside someone's head, and then the action in real life. The idea of sort of putting a slightly sort of robotic serial killer in there, or a psychopath who just murders people is less interesting. I like it when someone's got no other option whatsoever other than to kill, and then the consequences of that death are what's interesting.
Great. Heather?
Yeah, so motive to me is the reason to write these books. And I liked exploring motive so much that both of my books, in fact, have alternating chapters that flash back to the months leading up to the crime. So I can really play out and show exactly what happened in these characters' lives that led to this crime. And I would say, and this is not a spoiler because you'd have to read it to find out, but I think the motive I like to play with most is love. And in both my books, in very twisted ways, the crime was committed because of love.
Excellent. Deepa?
For me, I think with Djinn Patrol on the Purple Line, my interest was really in figuring out how the characters dealt with a really difficult situation over which they had no control. So my interest was really in finding out through the novel, by writing it, how the children dealt with this difficult situation when, their friends, their siblings are going missing, and how they made sense of it. So I think for me, the motives of the perpetrators were, I wasn't interested in that. And it was more about how the children dealt with a difficult situation. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So here's my thinly veiled plotter versus pantser question. But the official question is, do you know the end of your book when you start writing? And we will start with you, Quay.
I always think I know, but then a lot of times things change as you're writing it. So in The Missing American, I was pretty sure I knew, but as I got deeper into the story, it got more and more complicated, even for me. And so. Even though I had planned it in a certain way, things started to turn out in other ways that I hadn't imagined. And then also new characters seemed to come up that I hadn't planned on. And every once in a while, I surprised myself, realized that the murderer that I thought the person who I thought was going to be the murderer turns out not to be. In fact, my latest book, Sleep Well, My Lady, the person who I thought was going to be the murderer didn't work out, and I had to take a stab at it. I took a stab at it like 3 times before I got it right. And the funny thing was that I had laid the clue in my novel and missed it myself. So. I know that sounds a little ridiculous, but that's actually what happened. So yeah, definitely I may be a plotter, but things changed quite a bit.
Awesome. Ivy?
I mean, I just told everybody that I have no idea what I'm doing when I write.
Yeah.
But, and every book is different. So I didn't even know my novel Visitation Street was a crime novel until it got published. So that was interesting. inevitably, if you're writing like Richard said, if you're writing a novel with a murder in it, like you got to solve it. And I knew that we were going to have to figure out who this serial killer was in some sort of muted way. But what really interests me, and I knew that was going to have to happen, otherwise, my legions of adoring fans would be furious. But I feel that, what I'm really interested in, and this is what I never know, is like, when a crime is solved, that's not the important part. It's what comes afterwards, like what the effect on a community is and how people continue from there, and what sort of fissures have opened up, and what sort of, healing or people being brought together. So I kind of never really, that's, I think what's really important for me, at least, to focus on is like, once we've gotten the nuts and bolts of like satisfying, the curiosity, it's like, what are you going to leave behind when that's over? And like, that's the part I'm most excited to write, but I don't know what it is, but I know it has to be something. And like, I had no idea what was going to happen at the end of this book and how I was going to sort of bring it all together. But it was sort of the most fun part to figure out.
Great. Richard?
Yeah, I think in the Thursday Murder Club, the first one, I had an idea which sparked the whole story. So I knew I was heading somewhere. But as everyone said, it suddenly sort of... and I think in the one I'm writing at the moment, I know what's happened. I know someone's been killed, and I know who my cast is, but I have no idea who did it. And the experience of the first two has taught me that I'm going to be surprised along the way. And that's kind of the joy of it. Because if it's surprising me, and I've got ages to work it out, then it will surprise readers, and they've only got a day to work it out. So it's, if you're writing characters that you love and you're trying to write stories that are true and motives that are true, then people do surprise you and circumstances do surprise you while you're writing. And that can often lead to a really satisfying plot, because if it surprised you, it's going to surprise readers, I think. But in the first one, I was driving in a direction. I took a circuitous route to get there, but I ended up where I knew I was headed. Yeah.
Heather?
Yeah, for both of my books, I have had a scenario for the end. I've known my murder victim, and I've generally known how they get dead. And in both instances, the ideas in my mind were so messed up that the challenge of writing the book was making that make sense in the end. Like, so writing towards that end. In the second book, things did change a little bit around the end, but not enough, not so far from the original concept. I have kind of a flashlight in the forest approach to writing, which is I have that end and it's at the other side of a very, very thick, dense forest. And I'm just working my way through with a flashlight, and I can see like maybe 15 feet in front of me at any given time. And sometimes I have to turn around because I have like run into a cliff and go different directions. So, I'm definitely not a plotter.
That's a great analogy though, because that makes perfect sense. So there you go. Deepa?
Yeah, so I think I agree with what everyone else said. I think I'm not a plotter at all. I just follow my characters, and I learn things as they're learning what's happening. And I think there's an element of surprise for me as well, and that's what makes writing enjoyable. Yeah.
Excellent. Caroline?
I wrote a lot of books at the beginning of my career where I was required to submit an outline and a very detailed, first chapter and a very detailed outline. These were YA books, mainly for Scholastic. It's incredibly good discipline and incredibly hard to do because you have to know what's going to happen all the way through. But when I stopped writing YA and turned to adult books a few years ago, I decided to shrug about that and just start, which I've never done in all these books. It's immensely more fun. It's very time wasting, but in a very fun way, because you're going down all these avenues you didn't expect. And as you said, they may lead you off a cliff. But this is one of the few books I've ever written without really knowing what would happen.
How fun.
I just wanted to ask, Caroline, is it more intimidating if you do not have the outline?
It sounds as though it would be intimidating, doesn't it? But it was just fun because I've never done it loose leaf kind of writing like that.
Yeah.
That's great. I thought for sure you were going to say outline, but it's partly true. But with that many number of books early on, I figured that would be the case. So it's interesting that you've switched now. It's great. Okay. So Who are we starting with this time? Are we up to Ivy? Do you dream about your characters?
Yeah, it's funny. There's that moment where you're like, like it's not working, and that's like 75% of the book. It's just like it's not working, it's not working, it's not working. I hate this. Like I have been known to call my parents. I'm not joking. At 3 a.m, time change in the morning there, like cursing at them for letting me become a writer. It's not my finest moment, and I'm just like, I hate this. And then there's that moment where you're like, oh my God, like it's working, and like it becomes this sort of like slick machine, like chugging along the tracks. And it's like every waking hour, and it becomes alive to you, like it's like I have to write my way into these characters. I have to write my way into every book. And I just got there with the book I'm working on. I was like, oh, right. Okay. It's like, we got this now. Yeah, I would say I'm not sure I dream about them. I dream about some weird stuff. I have a 6-year-old, so I'm up and down a lot during the night still, and kind of I sleep strangely. But it's in my mind, and I sort of have this thing where I like to go to when I go to sleep at night. I'm like, I'm just gonna chill out and think about my book in this calm mental space as I'm closing my eyes, and that's when I know I'm in the zone. And sometimes it's in my dreams, but it's just sort of in my waking dreams, I can sort of see it, and that's thank God, man, because when you're in that space, it's just torture.
How about you, Richard?
Yeah, they do become incredibly real. It's very strange. I've got one of the members of the Thursday Murder Club, Joyce, writes a lot of the book in the form of a diary. So there's lots of first person stuff in there. And when the Thursday Murder Club really took off and was a success, and people were saying you must be thrilled, and I genuinely thought one day, I thought, oh God, I'm turning into an author, because I was thrilled for Joyce. I thought, that Joyce put all this work in to this diary, sort of reading it and listening to it and all of that. So I thought that, and then people are always trying to cast the movie of this. They're always saying to me, I tell you who I'd like to see play Joyce, and there's loads of brilliant British actors, Helen Mirren and Judi Dench and all these people, and they're saying, who would you like to see? And I think, what are you talking about? I've got them. You can't cast them. They're real people. And so that's, you realize then that you've gone through the looking glass a little bit, but I think you probably have to, don't you, when you're writing a series. But yeah, I'm in love with my characters, and they're very, very real to me.
Great. Heather?
Well, I used to have that classic dream about, you're running through the halls of your college and you have to take an exam that you haven't actually attended any of the classes for 4 months. That, since I started writing, has morphed into the author's version of that, which is that I dream that my book has been published and there's a catastrophic error in it, some horrible, misplaced clue or something completely wrong. And it's too late. I can't fix it. It's published. And I have that dream over and over again. And I don't know what that says about me, but it's not good.
Deepa?
No, I haven't ever dreamt of my characters, but they do become, as Richard and I were saying, they become very real. So, sometimes when I hear a song, when I was writing Djinn Patrol, I used to think, you'll really enjoy this song, or, one of the characters will, this is the kind of song that they'll be listening to. So in a sense, they became very real people to me. And I have to sort of, because it's a really difficult situation in India right now. And I find myself thinking, how they're doing. And then I have to sort of remind myself, these are not sort of real people.
Yeah. How about you, Caroline?
One of the fun things about being a writer is it's just licensed to daydream all the time. And I always have tons of plots and characters and possibilities and situations running through my mind, many of which will never become a book. But these are not nighttime dreams, these are daydreams. My one fear was sometimes I'm so deep into a book, I think, what if I can't extricate myself? What if I turn into a lunatic who's living inside this fictional world and I never get out?
That's great. How about you, Quay?
Well, I was interested in what Heather said, talking about that nightmare of making this horrible mistake. Well, I think about that all day in my waking hours. But as far as dreams are concerned, I might dream, maybe I dream about my characters and I don't know it. Because when I wake up, I don't usually remember the dream, but I often wake up with a solution to a plot that I've been pondering over the night before. So, it's a matter of having a very active subconscious, not so much unconscious, but subconscious, where a lot of dreams are made. And if you've never seen that movie Inception, I highly recommend it, because it's sort of like going into different levels of dream until you're not really sure exactly what's real and what is not. And I think that does happen to me to a certain extent, but all my ideas seem to come to me like either before I go to bed or on waking up. So and I think that's when the subconscious is the most active.
Fascinating. Okay, the last question I'm going to ask before we go to the audience questions is, we'll start with Richard. What books did you read in your formative years, and when did you know you wanted to be a writer? Was there a particular book?
It's a really good question. I didn't really read as a teenager. My mum would tell you that as well. I'm very visually impaired, and it's very hard for me to read, so I never did particularly. So I would read magazines, I'd read voraciously, but big print things and, stuff that, with very short, big, bold headlines. And it was probably only in my teens, probably sort of 16, 17. And I'll be a cliche and said, I read Catcher in the Rye. And I thought I wasn't aware you could write books like that talked about the world, that sort of shone a light on the world, and that said maybe things weren't as they were supposed to be. So I was a really, really late starter. And, straight after that, I immediately got into Agatha Christie and Dorothy L. Sayers and Marjorie Allingham and all of these, and I just read everything then. But I started with J.D. Salinger. I went straight onto crime. But I wasn't one of those, I wasn't a 7-year-old reading Jane Austen.
Yeah. Was there a particular book that made you want to be a writer? Well, The Catcher in the Rye?
No, it would be the crime books, because my grandfather was a police officer, so I always wanted to be a police officer, is the truth. I love crime. I'm fascinated with that. And then going inside the minds of police officers, it's very interesting, but going inside the minds of criminals, I found incredible. So the second I'm reading all of those golden age British detective novels, I was thinking, this is the thing I want to write. This is the thing I want to do. And listen, it took me another 30 years before I did it, but it's always been in there, and it was awakened by Agatha Christie first, I would say.
Excellent. Heather?
Well, I was the opposite. I grew up in a house where my dad had a library, kind of like he made this library for me, and he had a library like this in his house. And I had access to pretty much all the classics, and anything I wanted to read was there, really. And I just read it all. My early kind of mysteries were like, Nancy Drew and Trixie Belden and the Hardy Boys. And then I, read the Lord of the Rings and the Russians, and it was just reading constantly. So I can't really identify one particular book that set me on the path of being a writer. And since I didn't actually decide to be a writer until I was in my 40s, I think I would have to say that it was a lot of bad books that made me decide to be a writer. Because I started this with a whole lot of hubris, because I would read a bad book and go, I can write better than that. And then when I actually started writing, as Ivy knows, I had to go back and get a degree in it. It turned out to be really, 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 really hard.
Where you had to read 100 books and write one.
Yes.
We went to graduate school together. We were in the same class in graduate school.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
That's fun.
They made us read 100 books.
Yes, we did.
Wow.
And write.
All right. And write one, yeah. Deepa.
So I grew up reading books in my mother tongue, which is Malayalam and Indian language. And I was reading English books and, a lot of countries, which was colonized by the British. We had a whole lot of books from, English books. So there's a lot of Enid Blyton and Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew. So those are the kind of books that I grew up reading. But we also, because India had this surprisingly close relationship with what was Russia at that time, there were also Russian books which are translated into English. And they used to be available much more, readily than, say, American books. So I grew up reading a lot of Russian translations as well.
Interesting. And was there one that sparked your interest in writing where you thought, "Oh, I want to be a writer"?
No, it's really difficult because it's, to identify that one book, because there were a whole lot of books. But while writing Djinn Patrol, was when I realized, how much of an imprint those books had left in me, because many of these Russian children's books would have these children who were quite, they had a completely different opinion from others, and they weren't really afraid to air it. And it was quite an interesting combination, because there's a whole lot of propaganda in those books as well, which I completely missed as a child. But because the children themselves were, they were quite, they're full of swagger, and I completely missed those other elements, and only realized it when I went back to it, as an adult. Yeah. But I think those books have been an influence in writing this particular novel, which is, Djinn Patrol. Yeah.
Excellent. Caroline.
I had a wonderful 6th grade teacher. His name was Mr. Albert, and he made us write a short story every Friday. And the way he did it was he would rip the covers off New Yorker magazines. He had tons of them. And you remember those covers are very brightly colored. They sort of have a storyline. They're sort of cartoon-like. He would pass it out to you, and whatever cover you got, you had to write a short story based on it. And I was the one in the class who never stopped.
That's great. How about you, Quay?
Yeah, well, like Deepa, our house was full of both a lot of crime fiction and other books. Both of my parents were university lecturers, so the house was just full of books, and it seemed like every day I discovered a new one, and also which is kind of like what Heather, you said about the house being so full of books. And then also like Deepa, we can relate because our countries, India and Ghana respectively, were ex-British colonies. So I did read a lot of Enid Blyton as well. She's not that well known in the US, but throughout the Commonwealth, everybody knows Enid Blyton. And I see Richard nodding. Of course, yeah. You would too. Yeah, that was a big influence. And then, of course, easily Sherlock Holmes, who is still my idol. And I think Sherlock rubbed off a little bit on me because in my first series, the Darko Dawson series, Sherlock used to get into the cocaine a little bit, and Darko Dawson smokes weed, and that's when he gets some of his brilliant ideas. So yeah, they definitely rubbed off on me for sure.
Excellent. Ivy.
Well, I also grew up in a house full of books. My dad's a book publisher and my mom's an editor, so there was no shortage of books. And they would go to the London Book Fair and bring me back Enid Blyton. Just all this stuff.
There you go.
Exactly. I haven't thought so much about Enid Blyton in years as of today. I read a ton as a kid, but there was this little guest room in our house where they had all this crime fiction. Not sure why it was all jammed in there. I was allowed to, every summer when school ended, we'd go to the bookstore and I'd get my parents would pick out a bunch of books, and then I was allowed to get a couple other books, like Anne Perry and Tony Hillerman. And I don't remember, it wasn't until I had to start talking about crime fiction that I realized I read tons of it growing up. I read tons of Sherlock Holmes. I used to go to the Sherlockian breakfast at the Algonquin Hotel. So I read it. I didn't really think about it. I read tons of John Bellairs, who's proto-child, crime fiction for children. The best, by the way. John Bellairs' series are the best for kids. But the book that really wanted me not to be, I was a writer. I'd written a book, but then I read Jonathan Letham's The Fortress of Solitude, which is set in my neighborhood in Brooklyn. He grew up a block away from me. And that's the book that made me want to be a better writer. Because I was like, okay, this is books about my neighborhood. And it's so, a book doesn't have to be this giant, Ursula Le Guin fantasy. It can just be like very tight in your neighborhood and great things can happen. So I read that book and it totally changed my life. I decided to go to graduate school to get this problem under control where they don't like crime fiction. Heather and I were both in the same workshop. We didn't know we were reading crime fiction. Out. And so, it's everything adds up. But that Jonathan Lethem book was sort of a transformative experience.
Fantastic. So we're now going to move to the crowd questions. Heather, I'm going to pop this on the screen, and if it cuts you off a little, I'm sorry, I'll take it off in just a second. What was the most surprising reaction you've received to your book? And I mean, it can be this new one that's Edgar nominated, or if you just have a good story, we can put it for whichever book. But let's start with you, Heather.
Well, I would say the most surprising reaction I've had is fairly recent, which is that apparently some people consider it a young adult novel. And it is not. I mean, that's not how I wrote it or how it was marketed, but I'm definitely, anybody who wants to read it can read it. If you're 16 and you want to read it, go right ahead. But that was a surprise to me.
That's funny. How about you, Deepa?
I can't really think of anything that was very surprising. I think I was a bit naive because my book has a lot of words from Indian languages, and I just assumed, because as an Indian, I read books from the States or anywhere in the West, and if I don't understand something, I will go and look it up. And I just assumed that people will do the same for if the book is set in India or any other country. And I think I've been surprised by some of the emails that I've received from people who are very angry that I haven't offered a translation and that it's quite difficult to. I mean, I didn't even think about it, that it's actually quite difficult to flip to a glossary if you're on Kindle, and I didn't realize that. So, I mean, it's good to know, I guess, if I write a next book.
Or maybe people can just be better humans and, look words up. It's okay. I wouldn't take that too hard. How about you, Caroline?
I guess the most surprising, also the most fun thing, was the nomination for the Edgar. I mean, I've had a long career, and at this end, suddenly to have this lovely, marvelous thing happen to the six of us, it's really great.
Yeah.
How about you, Quay?
Yeah, I second that. I actually thought the Edgar was, when I first heard about the Edgar, it sounded like it was something like, in another universe, that it wouldn't have anything to do with me. I had no idea what it was. I thought it was like for very special authors. Which was not me.
It is the six of you.
It kind of blows my mind. But anyway, I think one of the funniest reactions was actually from my my editor, Judith Grains, at Soho Press. When I first started writing for Soho, my first novel with them was Murder at Cape 3 Points, which is the Darker Dawson series. And I was mentioning a couple of dishes, like, when my characters sit down a lot to eat, actually. And so, I'd throw in like a meal that they were eating. And Juliet, who I found out later was a big foodie, she wrote in the margins, okay, what's in this? Describe it. We need more food porn, she said, more. And so that was actually when I started describing all my meals in full, because I knew Juliet.
She does. I think every year she does the whole Feast of the Seven Fishes and all of that. Like every time I see her on Facebook, there's food everywhere. Yeah. So I totally believe that story. Yeah, how about you? She's great. How about you, Ivy?
My first book that anyone really paid attention to was co-released but by my publisher and Dennis Lane. And Dennis Lane it has a sticker that says Dennis Lane Books on it. And a lot of people thought that I was a pen name of Dennis Lehane, and there were all these really weird Goodreads and Amazon reviewers about Dennis Lehane was taking the James Patterson route and farming out his work, and it was a lot. So that I'm not Dennis Lehane is sort of the big. That I am Dennis Lehane's secret female identity is the most surprising reaction to anything I've done.
Oh man, that's too funny. All right, Richard.
Well, firstly, I just got to get over the shock that Ivy isn't Dennis Lehane, because I thought she was.
I know.
Thursday Murder Club is set in a real place. It's where my mum really lives. And she said that all the other residents, they knew I was writing the book, and they said, can you don't tell anyone where it's really set? Because what if it's a big hit and then we'll get tourists? Firstly, I said it's not going to be a big hit. But as with so many other things, they were right about that. But they said, so don't tell anyone. Now it is a big hit, of course. You go down there, every single one of them. Could you start telling people where it really is? Because we don't gone from we don't want any tourists to we want to sell T-shirts now. So that's another.
That's adorable. Okay, I'm not going to put these two questions up because they're related and that would be convoluted. But essentially, we have a couple people who've asked. One, how did you find focusing on fiction during the pandemic? And related, do you plan on including this time in your writing? And I think we've circled back to starting with Deepa again.
How I found writing during the pandemic? Was it the question? Yeah.
Yes, essentially.
Yeah. For me, it's been really difficult because, I'm away from most of my family and I find myself being quite anxious about what's happening there. I think if you're actually in a place, then you feel less anxious about it, and being away has been quite difficult. And so my attention span has been quite short, and I've found it quite difficult to be writing during this time. But I'm working on something which is a historical novel at the moment. So the question of the pandemic hasn't come up so far. Yeah.
Great. Caroline?
I lost track. What are we talking about?
We're talking about, did you find it, have you found it hard to focus on writing fiction during this time? And then do you plan on including the last year or so with the pandemic in your writing?
Well, fiction is the only thing that kept me going during all this isolation. If I hadn't had access to books, I don't know how I would have survived it. And writing is done in isolation anyway, at least for me. I don't have company when I'm writing. So that wasn't really a change. I think that the change for me was I always thought of myself as a person who could do just fine alone. And like maybe 48 hours into isolation, I thought, oh, wait, I need people. Where are they? So that was very enlightening for me, how I totally deceived myself about how I was comfortable being alone. We're social animals, and we have to have a social existence of some kind at all times. And that will figure in a book someday, the loss of a social existence.
Interesting. Quay?
Which makes me very abnormal, I guess, because the lonesomeness is fine with me. So, but I would say one of the problems I had during the pandemic was not the isolation so much, but I'm a physician in another life, and so just the whole dynamics of the pandemic itself was endlessly fascinating. I probably read every single detailed analysis of the pandemic that is possible, and so in that sense, it was a distraction for me. But the isolation was not an issue, and I don't think being stuck at home made me write any more efficiently, which is kind of interesting. You would think this like, oh well, I'm not going to go anywhere, so let me just sit down and write for 12 hours a day. It doesn't work out that way.
Yeah. Ivy?
I mean, so I have a 6-year-old and my husband's at home. This is like the first time I've been at home alone without them in about a year, by the way, right now. They're just at the house. I was like, I'm not sure whether the pandemic has prevented me from like fully, engaging with fiction as much as I should normally would. I think having like a homeschooled 6-year-old really has been more of an issue than, the general malaise of, what's going on and the horror show of the world. But I am writing a little less efficiently than I used to, possibly because I'm not doing other things besides drinking. But I feel like there's this huge resistance to. I mean, I think McKenna and I have a lot of the similar Facebook friends. Everyone's asking this question, about the pandemic. Everyone's like, we're not putting it in our books. I'm like, I sure as hell am. I'm writing a book set in like pandemic. It's like set in 1 week in the pandemic because that's what I'm living through now. And like, if you read my work, it's always something that's really present in my life, like right outside my window. So like, that's what I'm writing about. Like, and I'm sorry if people don't want to read about that because it happened. Like my husband works in TV and he's like, oh, the pandemic, that's a third rail. You can't have it in a book. I'm like, well, let's see. Otherwise, I just flushed a year down the toilet. But yes, I'm writing a pandemic forward novel. And I'm proud.
It's a bold statement, Ivy. That's a bold statement. All right, Richard.
Yeah, I found writing an enormous comfort. So I was writing the second novel during the lockdown. And I think in isolation, and my kids are 20 and 22 and left home and all that kind of stuff. So no homeschooling, thankfully. But, the two things that you need, or I certainly needed, I think lots of people needed, a routine and momentum. And writing gives you both of those things. It certainly gave me a lot of routine. It gives you momentum, moving your story forward. So I was immensely grateful that I had that in my life. In terms of mentioning the pandemic, I haven't particularly, and I wouldn't, other than forever as a writer, if you introduce a new character, you're looking for the shortest possible way to introduce what sort of human being they are. And one guy comes in who we know is a wrong 'un, and Ron, one of the Thursday Murder Club, says, oh, that's Colin. He didn't wear a mask during the pandemic, right? That's all you need to know about Colin. Okay, one sentence. I know everyone goes, okay, I get exactly who Colin is, but that's the only mention I make in the whole thing. It's sort of in a different universe.
Fair enough. Heather?
Well, I kind of like Ivy, lost my isolation during the pandemic because my husband started working from home and my college-age son came home and was taking all of his online classes. So that was a little bit disruptive, I will say. But that said, the book I'm working on is set in World War II. And it's been interesting, actually, because when I wasn't feeling like I could really write, I would use that time to do research. And it was interesting to see the contrast between how we reacted to that particular crisis as a nation versus how we reacted to this pandemic. Like, there's literally no way you can imagine that people in 1943 would say, how dare you tell us that we have to salvage our scrap metal? That's an infringement of our freedom. Or that we have to ration this or ration that. There was a unity around confronting that threat that was missing during this past year. And so for me, it was an interesting contrast, but at the same time, it was also a nice place to go inside my head to a place where the pandemic was not and where the world was a different place.
Yeah. So we started with Deepa, right? So that was everyone. Everyone got to that question? Yes. Okay. I'm sorry to the people who had more questions, but with 6 authors, each question takes a while. So thank you for your questions. I'm sorry I didn't get to more of them. I am going to close with this because we are here today because you're nominated for the Edgar Award for Best Novel, which is a huge deal. And I want you to tell me about how you found out about getting nominated. So let's start with you, Caroline.
Oh, it was just an email. Isn't that a calm down? I mean, where was the trumpet chorus? It was just an email.
All right, Quay, this is going to be a boring question if it's just email from everyone. How about you?
No, mine was a little different. I just come out of the gym in the morning and I got the message on Instagram. Congrats on your nomination to the Ed. No. It said congrats on your not. It just said congrats, and then I said for what? On your nomination for the Edgars. I said, what are you talking about? And then I looked it up, and there it was.
Excellent. And then you thought, but I'm not one of those people.
Yeah, no, I'm not one of those people.
Awesome. How about you, Ivy?
I sort of knew the nominations were coming out, but I just had no, it's such a crapshoot. I mean, it's a huge field and, the Edgars are notoriously wide ranging and but I woke up really early that day because sometimes I get up super early and my phone was like, there's like a million Twitter messages. And I was like, no way. Like, I just saw that number on Twitter. I never checked Twitter. I was like, I don't want to see this. And then my editor my former editor, Zach Wagman, had called and texted. And I was like, oh my God. But I sort of didn't want to check. And then it was surprising.
Richard.
Sorry to disappoint Caroline, but they did send a trumpet chorus round to my house. Honestly, Caroline, they did it for everyone, and now I feel terrible. No, do you know what? It's exactly the same as Quay, really, because it wouldn't occur to me that I'd be nominated for one. I thought maybe there may be some British awards or something, but when I look at these 6 people here and to be amongst them is extraordinary. It wouldn't have occurred to me. So I had the same thing. I started getting messages and texts saying, "Oh, congratulations on the news," and you're thinking, "Hold on a minute, what news is this? Please don't let my daughter be pregnant." And it's the Edgars, and I cannot begin to describe how thrilled I was and still am. So thank you so much to them. It's amazing.
Heather?
So I was up in Boise, Idaho with my parents, and my mom actually in the middle of January had a massive health issue. And so I had flown out there. I actually stayed there until just about a month ago. We thought she was going to die. And so every day was me getting up at 7 a.m., going to the hospital. I was like the one person that they allowed in to sit by her bedside. So I literally had no idea what was going on in the world. And one morning I woke up and my habit was always to like just check my phone. And there's a text from Ivy that says something to the effect of like, "I thought this might happen, blah, 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 congratulations." And I texted back, I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And she said, "Do you not know?" Has this award? I was like, I don't even know what day it is. But it was like this wonderful ray of joy in a very dark period. And my mom is much better by now, by the way. She's doing okay. But yeah,
Wonderful.
That's how I found out.
Her dad's a huge
Deepa.
fan. He comes to VoucherCon with you, so he must have been so excited.
Yes, he was thrilled.
That's great. Deepa?
Mine's quite, it's like quiz. Like a friend messaged me and I was really surprised because, I don't really think of it as, I don't know what my novel is, but I didn't think it would be nominated for the Edgars. So then I had to sort of look it up to actually convince myself that it was true. And then I got an email from my editor, which helped. Yeah. I'm always waiting for somebody to mail me and say that was a mistake.
Well, I don't think it was. I want to wish all of you the best luck. I know there are some wonderful books on this panel. I will not tell you my picks or my favorites because they're irrelevant. I'm sure the committee did a wonderful job. And again, best of luck. Congratulations. Thanks to everyone who's been watching. Thanks to all of you for joining me this afternoon. It has made Independent Bookstore Day a even more special day. We really were wanting to celebrate this today. So I'm going to end this and go back to the bookstore for some more work. As I said before, the links to order are in the comments. Make sure to tune in. Hang on, I'm going to get this right. Let me look at my notes. Make sure to tune in for the Edgar Awards ceremony, April 29th at 1 p.m. Eastern, and you can register on Twitter in the @EdgarAwards Twitter profile. So again, best of luck, and I'm going to sign us all off. You guys have a great evening, afternoon, day, wherever you are. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.